The morning my daughter-in-law told me to leave my own house so her parents could have my bedroom, I finally understood something I had spent years refusing to admit. My son was no longer protecting me from her. He was protecting his marriage, even if it meant sacrificing me in the process. They had confused my patience with weakness and my love with permission. For 6 months, I had opened my home to my son and his wife while they saved money to finish building their new house. I believed I was helping them create a future together. I never imagined I would eventually have to fight to hold on to the home I had spent most of my life working for. My name is Margaret Ellis, and I had worked as a high school librarian for nearly 30 years before retiring. My coastal house was not a huge mansion or an extravagant property, but it was the one place in the world that truly belonged to me. I had purchased it with my earnings, years of savings, and a life insurance settlement I received after my husband passed away. Every room held a memory. The small reading corner beside the windows was where I spent countless rainy afternoons curled up with mystery novels, while the guest wing had taken me months to prepare because I wanted visiting family members to feel comfortable and welcome. When my son Ryan and his wife, Vanessa, needed somewhere to stay while construction on their new house was completed, I welcomed them without asking for a single dollar in rent. I told myself it would only be temporary. 6 months later, however, temporary had somehow turned into ownership in Vanessa's mind. At first, the changes were so small that I convinced myself they were harmless. Vanessa reorganized my kitchen because she preferred to keep everything arranged differently. Then she claimed the formal sitting room as her personal workspace and suggested that I move my books out to the back porch. Whenever I complained, Ryan always gave me the same explanation. He would tell me that Vanessa was stressed, that she was under pressure, and that I should simply be patient with her. I kept giving in because I loved my son. Looking back, that was my biggest mistake. Every time I swallowed an objection, Vanessa learned that there would be no consequences. Every time Ryan avoided confronting her, she became a little more confident. Eventually, she stopped asking for permission altogether. She started talking about changes to the house as if she already owned it. I saw exactly what was happening, but I kept reassuring myself that everything would change once their new house was completed. I thought I only needed to endure the situation a little longer. Then one morning, Vanessa walked into my kitchen and showed me just how far her sense of entitlement had gone. I was standing beside the kitchen island with a cup of coffee when she entered wearing a neatly pressed coat, her tablet tucked beneath one arm. She didn't even say good morning. Instead, she glanced toward the guest wing and casually announced that her parents would be arriving the following Friday. Then she calmly explained that they would be staying in the main-level suite because they had mobility issues. According to her, that meant I would need to find somewhere else to stay for the summer. She actually suggested a nearby seasonal RV park, saying it as casually as if she were recommending a pleasant vacation destination. For several seconds, I could only stare at her. Ryan was sitting at the dining table with his laptop open. I looked directly at him, expecting him to finally tell his wife that she had crossed a line. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on his screen. I asked Vanessa to repeat herself because I hoped I had somehow misunderstood what she was saying. She didn't hesitate. She explained that her parents needed the larger, more accessible bedroom, and that I could return after their 2-month visit was finished. Then she smiled as though the decision had already been made and there was nothing left for anyone to discuss. Something inside me suddenly became very quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. And I didn't ask Ryan why he was allowing his wife to speak to me that way. For the first time in 6 months, I simply stood there and listened. I simply finished my coffee, picked up my jacket, and walked outside. I headed toward the small garden shed behind the house, the place I had always gone whenever I needed to clear my mind. I sat down at my old workbench and looked around at the tools I had collected over the years. That was when I finally understood that this wasn't really about Vanessa's parents. It was about whether I was willing to let someone else decide what happened inside my own home. I took out my phone and called Daniel Mercer, a local locksmith who had worked on my property several years earlier. I explained that I wanted every exterior lock replaced with heavy-duty electronic systems, and that I wanted a private master code known only to me. Daniel immediately realized that something unusual was going on, but he didn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply agreed to come the following morning with commercial-grade equipment. After the call, I went back inside and found Vanessa still sitting at the kitchen island. She asked whether I had reconsidered her request. I told her that I had heard her clearly and understood exactly what she wanted. She then reminded me that her parents were already arranging their rental car and that I needed to have my belongings removed from the main bedroom by Thursday. I looked at her calmly and didn't argue. Instead, I picked up my keys, drove into town, and went straight to my bank. I separated my personal finances from the household account I had created to make things easier while Ryan and Vanessa were living with me. I also canceled the additional debit card I had given Ryan for groceries. That afternoon, I met my financial advisor, Patricia Cole, near the harbor. We carefully reviewed the property documents and financial records. The deed was entirely in my name. Ryan had never contributed toward the mortgage, and neither he nor Vanessa had signed a lease agreement. Patricia explained my legal position and advised me to document everything properly if I wanted them to leave. I told her that I wasn't trying to start a war with my own family. I simply wanted my boundaries back. She helped me prepare the necessary paperwork and confirmed that I retained control over access to my property. That evening, I found Ryan sitting alone on the back patio. The setting sun was turning the water a warm orange, but he looked exhausted and unhappy. I sat across from him and calmly told him exactly what Vanessa had demanded. His first reaction was to defend her. He said her parents could be difficult and that Vanessa was only trying to make them comfortable. Then he suggested that I stay at the RV park for a few weeks. I reminded him that this was the house I had worked for decades to afford. I told him I wasn't going to give up my own bedroom, simply so someone else could be more comfortable. Ryan became frustrated and accused me of making the situation more difficult than it needed to be. I answered quietly that if his family needed more space, they were welcome to find it somewhere else. I wasn't going to create that extra space by removing myself from my own home. He stared at me for several seconds. I could tell he still expected me to eventually give in because that was what I had always done. But this time, something had changed. The following morning, Vanessa began stacking cardboard boxes near my bedroom. She made phone calls to her mother and discussed where different pieces of furniture would go once her parents arrived. At one point, she even talked about turning my reading corner into another sitting area. I didn't confront her. Instead, I quietly gathered my grandmother's jewelry, the important family photographs, my husband's old letters, and several other personal items that meant too much to me to leave unattended. I gathered my important papers, old photographs, journals, family keepsakes, and other valuables and placed everything inside a secured cedar chest in my locked office. I wasn't preparing to leave my home. I was preparing to protect the things that belonged to me. At 8:30 the following morning, Daniel arrived in his service truck. Vanessa immediately rushed onto the porch and demanded to know what he was doing. When I calmly told her that the exterior locks were being replaced, she laughed as though I had said something ridiculous. She insisted that the existing locks worked perfectly and complained that electronic keypads were completely unnecessary. I looked at her and told her that the security of my property was not a family decision. Daniel began working on the front entrance, while Vanessa continued watching him with obvious frustration. Eventually, Ryan came outside and saw the equipment spread across the porch. Vanessa immediately demanded that he stop me. Instead, Ryan quietly told her to let me do it because it was my house. For the first time, I saw uncertainty appear on Vanessa's face. By that afternoon, every exterior entrance had been fitted with heavy-duty keypad locks. Daniel gave me the master access information and helped me set up the entire system. I created a temporary code for Ryan, but I made certain that I alone controlled the master access. That evening, I asked Ryan to come into my study. 2 documents were waiting on my desk. One was a copy of the property deed. The other was a formal written notice requiring him and Vanessa to make arrangements to leave. Ryan stared at the papers in disbelief. He asked if I was really throwing my own son out of his home. I corrected him immediately. I wasn't throwing my son out. I was taking back the home I had temporarily allowed him to use. I told him that I had welcomed him because I loved him. I had never asked him for rent payment or even gratitude. But Vanessa had crossed a serious line when she decided that I should leave my own bedroom so her parents could have it. Ryan tried to explain that Vanessa had been overwhelmed and under a lot of pressure. I told him that being overwhelmed did not give anyone the right to humiliate another person or treat them as though they didn't matter. His silence told me that he finally understood I was serious. Friday arrived. Vanessa had already made all the arrangements for her parents. Their flight was scheduled to arrive that afternoon, and she seemed convinced that once they appeared at my front door, I would become too embarrassed to enforce my decision. Ryan came downstairs that morning looking exhausted. He quietly admitted that he had suggested getting her parents a hotel room, but Vanessa had refused. She believed that allowing her parents to stay somewhere else would make her look weak. I looked at my son and told him that real authority came from responsibility and respect, not intimidation or pressure. He slowly nodded. Later that morning, Vanessa left for the airport. As soon as her vehicle disappeared down the driveway, I revoked Ryan's temporary access code. Then I gathered every box, grocery bag, garment, and personal item belonging to Vanessa and placed everything neatly beneath the covered side porch. I didn't damage anything. I didn't throw anything away. I simply returned her belongings to her and reclaimed my space. Then I reset the house exactly the way I wanted it. I placed my books back on the coffee table, adjusted the curtains, changed the thermostat, and opened the windows so the ocean breeze could once again move freely through the rooms. At nearly 2 o'clock, I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of tea and a novel. The house was quiet again. I had expected to feel frightened. Instead, I felt strangely peaceful. Instead, I felt relieved. A few minutes later, several vehicles turned into the driveway. Vanessa stepped out with her parents and Ryan. She walked confidently toward the front door and entered the access code she had been using for months. The keypad flashed red. She tried the code again, but nothing happened. Ryan checked his phone and realized that his temporary access had been disabled too. Vanessa immediately started pounding on the door, demanding that I open it because her parents were standing outside. I walked to the front entrance and looked through the glass panel. Her parents looked confused and visibly embarrassed. Vanessa, however, looked furious. I calmly told her that this was my home. My name was on the deed, and the decision about who entered my property was mine to make. I explained that all of her belongings had been placed safely beneath the covered side porch, and that she, Ryan, and her parents needed to leave. Her father finally seemed to understand what had happened. He looked at his daughter and asked whether the house actually belonged to me. Vanessa had nothing to say. Ryan walked over to the side porch, picked up 2 of Vanessa's suitcases, and carried them toward his car. Then he told her that they were going to stay at a hotel. For the first time, he wasn't asking me to compromise. He was accepting responsibility for the choices he had made. Within 20 minutes, the driveway was empty. I watched their vehicles disappear down the coastal road before closing the curtains and returning to my favorite chair. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence felt completely different. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence I had endured for months. It was peace. 2 weeks later, Ryan came to see me during his lunch break. He stayed on the porch instead of walking inside without asking, which immediately told me that something had changed. He told me that he and Vanessa had rented an apartment in town and had started marriage counseling. Then he looked at the new keypad and admitted that he should have stopped Vanessa the very first time she disrespected me. He said he had avoided confronting her because he was afraid that standing up to me would damage his marriage. I told him that recognizing his mistake was only the beginning. What mattered now was learning to take responsibility for his choices. I reminded him that he would always be my son and that I loved him. But loving someone did not mean giving up my dignity or allowing them to control my life. Ryan nodded. He apologized, gave me a brief hug, and then walked back toward his car. I watched until his vehicle disappeared down the road. Then I went back inside. The afternoon sunlight filled the rooms, and the ocean breeze moved gently through the open windows. For months, I had been so focused on keeping everyone else comfortable that I had forgotten something important. There was nothing selfish about wanting peace in the home I had spent a lifetime building. That day, my son didn't lose his mother. He simply learned a lesson I should have taught him much earlier. Loving someone does not give them the right to control you, and setting a boundary does not mean you love them any less.